Germans feared his name long before they ever saw his tank crest the ridgeline. To them he was a rumor at first, a whisper that traveled between artillery crews and panzer commanders. A commander who seemed to survive every barrage. A man whose tank emerged from smoke when logic said it should have been torn apart. A ghost who somehow destroyed 18 German tanks in a span of weeks, carving his place into the terrifying folklore of the Eastern Front. His real name was Captain Alexei Morozov, but almost no one called him that anymore. To his crew he was commandeer. To the men of his regiment he was the anchor. To his enemies he eventually became the unkillable. He didn't choose any of those names. They were built around him the same way a city slowly forms around a mountain. It wasn't a matter of his desire. It was simply who he became in the furnace of war. The story of how he reached that point didn't begin with heroism. It began with exhaustion. In the winter of 1943, after months of continuous engagements, Alexei's regiment was reduced to half strength. Snow lay in broken heaps on the frozen fields, and the steel hulls of destroyed T-34 stuck out like gravestones. His own tank, a T-34/76, had survived 3 direct hits the night before. One penetrated the side armor and killed their radio operator instantly. Another shattered the toolboxes along the hull. The third punched into the engine compartment, but somehow failed to ignite. Mechanics told him it was a miracle. Alexei didn't like miracles. Miracles suggested he had no control. His crew lived inside that tank like it was a second skin. There was Sergei, the gunner, whose calmness had become legendary, even when shells smashed into the earth just meters away. Pavel, the driver, a thin man with powerful forearms, knew how to make the tank dance across terrain other crews considered suicidal. Yuri, the loader, strong enough to swing a shell like it weighed nothing. And Alexei, who felt responsible for all of them in a way that sometimes kept him awake long after night settled. The morning of the battle that would make his name known began quietly. Frost clung to the grass like silver grains of rice. The regiment commander stood in front of a wooden map board with a cigarette between his lips and a look that spoke of dwindling options. German Panzer Roman 4s and Panzer Roman 3s had punched through a section of the line the evening before. Their infantry followed with brutal precision, overrunning trenches, scattering supply columns, and threatening to encircle an entire Soviet rifle division. If the panzers crossed the river at the village of Vasakovo, the front in that sector would collapse. Alexei listened as the briefing unfolded. Intelligence estimated between 10 and 15 German tanks advancing toward the bridge. They likely believed Soviet resistance had been broken. They were wrong, though not by much. The Soviet regiment had only 8 operational tanks left, 3 of which had engine trouble. Someone asked whether reinforcements were coming. The commander shook his head. Alexei didn't feel fear then. He felt the familiar tightening inside, the sensation that his body was preparing itself for another long day of uncertainty. War's rhythm had become mechanical for him. He nodded, saluted, and walked back to his tank. The steel hatch was cold when he touched it. He lowered himself inside, feeling the subtle comfort of the cramped interior. Sergei, check the sights. He ordered. Pavel, warm the engine slowly. Yuri, stow the ammunition tight. We'll be moving quickly today. They each responded with a short, practiced affirmation. The rituals calmed them. As they advanced toward Vasakovo, the distant thunder of German engines told them they were not alone in the frozen countryside. The land stretched open in dry, brittle expanses, dotted by abandoned farmhouses and clusters of winter. Thin trees. Smoke rose near the horizon, not from German tanks yet, but from burning villages struck the night before. The first engagement happened near a shallow gully. Pavel kept the tank low, using the terrain to mask their silhouette. Alexei peered through the optics and saw a Panzer Roman 3 cresting a ridge like a metal animal sniffing for prey. He whispered for Sergei to hold fire. The German tank paused, turret rotating slightly as if scenting danger. Now, Alexei said, the T-34 gun roared, the recoil slamming through the hull. The shell hit the Panzer square in the turret ring, and fire burst from its hatches. The blackened turret rolled backward, the tank dying before its crew could react. Not 30 seconds later, a Panzer Roman 4 emerged behind it. It fired first, the high-velocity round carving into the earth just left of their position. Pavel twisted the tank sharply, and Alexei ordered Sergei to aim for the lower frontal plate. Another shot cracked the air. Another German tank folded into fire. 2 kills in under a minute, but the day was far from done. They pushed closer to the village, passing groups of Soviet infantry who shouted warnings and pointed toward the river. The Germans were moving fast, faster than expected. Their armored spearhead had gained speed on the open ground, and now the panzers were practically racing toward the bridge, hoping to seize it intact. Alexei realized they were running against time. The regiment's other tanks were still kilometers behind, stuck in soft ground or slowed by mechanical issues. If he didn't intercept the panzers before the village, they would be too deep to dislodge later. He decided to advance alone. His crew didn't question him, though he saw the understanding in their eyes. 1 T-34 against an armored column wasn't a battle. It was an act of will. But they followed because Alexei had kept them alive through impossible situations before, and loyalty forged under fire held stronger than steel. They crossed into the ruins of Vysokovo just as the first German tank fired into a wooden house, blowing it apart. Civilian belongings, shoes, broken furniture, a cracked mirror, lay scattered in the street. Smoke rolled across the rooftops. German infantry moved methodically, checking buildings, signaling to the panzers. Alexei knew the narrow streets could either kill them or save them. He chose to use the clutter of the village as a shield. "Driver, right?" he said, and Pavel turned down an alley barely wide enough for the tank's tracks. They forced their way through a wooden fence, splintering it like balsa. From behind a collapsed barn they found their next target. A Panzer Roman 4 idled near a well, its crew unaware. Sergei fired at the thinner side armor. The German tank erupted in flames so violently it illuminated the snow like sunrise. German infantry scrambled, pointing, shouting. 2 panzers turned their turrets toward the barn. Pavel yanked the controls and reversed into cover as shells smashed through the boards, spraying the interior of the T-34 with dust and splinters. Another round hit the stone foundation, shaking the hull. Alexei gripped the periscope. "We flank," he said. "Left alley." Pavel accelerated. The engine roared. The tank shoved through debris, through a narrow corridor where smoke swirled so thick they could barely see. They burst out behind the Germans, catching them exposed. Sergei fired twice, each time with precision that made even Alexei silently grateful. 2 German tanks burned, their ammunition cooking off in violent chain reactions. That made 6, but now the Germans knew exactly where they were. A heavy round hit the T-34's turret, gouging a chunk of steel and sending Yuri sprawling. He coughed, waved off help, and loaded another shell. They were still in the fight. They moved deeper into the village, navigating streets where wounded German soldiers crawled for cover and roving machine guns raked windows. Mortar rounds began falling in erratic patterns. The Germans were trying to box them in, to pin them long enough for the remaining panzers to coordinate a direct hit. Alexei decided to swing toward the town square. It was risky, open ground, but it would give them a clear angle toward the bridge approach. If they could stop the German column there, they might delay the crossing long enough for the regiment to regroup. As they entered the square, a Panzer Roman 4 fired from behind a stone building. The round missed by a meter. Another German tank, this one a Stu-G Roman 3, appeared from an alley. Alexei made the decision fast. Pavel rammed the Stu-G. Pavel didn't hesitate. The engine howled. The T-34 surged forward and smashed into the side of the German assault gun, caving in its track and nearly flipping the vehicle. The German crew panicked, scrambling out of hatches as the Soviet tank backed away just far enough for Sergei to put a shell straight into the Stu-G's exposed top armor. The second kill came seconds later when the Panzer Roman 4 tried to swing around for a flanking shot. Alexei ordered a snap, fire, Sergei's shell hit just below the turret, blowing it off like a cast iron lid. 8 tanks down. The square was filled with fire and shockwaves. Smoke obscured everything. Buildings groaned as they collapsed, but Alexei wasn't thinking about the chaos. He was thinking of something else. The sound of engines approaching, the deep growl of several panzers moving as a coordinated unit, the German main force. Pavel drove toward the river road. Through the smoke, silhouettes emerged. A line of Panzer Roman force, spaced evenly, sweeping forward like hunters. Their turrets rotated in unison as soon as they spotted the lone T-34. Alexei felt time stretch thin. He told Yuri to prepare for rapid loading. He told Sergei to target the lead tank. He told Pavel to angle the hull to increase their effective armor. The first barrage came. 3 shells slammed into the area around them, throwing dirt and debris across the hull. One hit the glacis plate at a steep angle, ricocheting with a scream of tortured metal. Another punched into a stone wall beside them, scattering rubble across the street. The T-34 fired back. The lead Panzer Roman 4 exploded, blocking the path of those behind it. A second German tank moved to the side, seeking a clearer angle. Alexei aimed for the drive sprocket. The shot disabled it instantly, immobilizing the Panzer. 2 more shells struck their tank, one hitting the turret so hard it nearly knocked the wind from Sergei. Smoke leaked from the breach. The crew coughed but kept loading. Alexei ordered Pavel to charge. The T-34 surged forward at full speed, bouncing over debris, flying past burning trucks and broken barrels. The Germans didn't expect such recklessness. Their formation faltered for a moment, their guns unable to depress fast enough for close-range shots. Sergei fired at point-blank distance, hitting a Panzer dead center. The explosion shook the ground. Another shot followed, shredding a second tank's side armor. German crewmen scrambled out only to be engulfed by fire. That made 11, but more panzers were pushing from the right flank. The armor clash thundered across the village like an earthquake. Soldiers on both sides dove for cover as the tanks closed in the way predators do in the final seconds before a kill. Alexei ordered a sudden halt. Pavel braked hard. The German gunners overshot, their shells slamming into the ground ahead. Sergei used the split, second pause to take out another tank. Yuri loaded faster than he ever had, sweat pouring despite the cold. The Germans began retreating toward the river now, not in panic, but in regrouping discipline. Alexei realized their intent. They wanted to lure the Soviet tank into the open fields by the river where they had more space to maneuver and superior firing arcs. He refused to be baited. Instead, he moved the tank onto a small rise behind a half-collapsed stable. From there, he could see the entire road leading to the bridge. The Germans didn't know he had taken that position. They thought the T-34 was still in the village. The first Panzer to roll into view didn't even realize it was exposed. Sergei fired. The German tank detonated so violently that pieces of turret armor arced across the riverbank like burning leaves. A second Panzer turned its turret upward toward him. Sergei hit it before it could fire. A third tried to take cover behind a wrecked truck. That too fell to the T-34's main gun, 14. The remaining Panzers hesitated. Alexei knew hesitation could shift the balance. He ordered Pavel to advance just enough to reveal their position. The Germans took the bait and fired immediately, shells screaming toward them. But because the T-34 was still angled on the slope, the rounds either skipped or deflected. Sergei scored another kill, 15. The battlefield grew eerily quiet. Smoke swirled. The river glimmered behind the haze. The surviving German tank crews understood now that this was no ordinary opponent. One of the remaining panzers attempted to flank across a frozen ditch. The ice cracked under its weight, slowing it just enough for Alexei's crew to destroy it with a well-placed shot. 16. Only 2 remained. They coordinated carefully, moving apart so that firing on one would expose the T-34 to the other. Alexei respected the tactic. It was textbook armored maneuvering. He also knew how to break it. He directed Pavel to move toward the thicker patch of ruins where smoke still drifted from burning buildings. There they would disappear from German optics, if only for moments. Moments were enough. They emerged from the smoke behind the flanking Panzer. Sergei fired into its engine compartment. Flames burst through the vents. 17. The last Panzer fired immediately, hitting the T-34 square in the side. The impact rocked the crew violently. Sparks filled the turret. Yuri slipped but recovered. The armor held, barely. Alexei didn't hesitate. Full speed, Pavel. The T-34 charged through the smoke. The German tank reversed, trying to maintain distance, but it was too slow. The Soviet tank came around the burning wreck, cutting the angle, forcing the German crew into frantic turret rotation. Sergei already had the gun lined up. He fired. The final Panzer Roman 4 burst into fire, collapsing in on itself like a dying star. 18. The battlefield went still. Only the crackle of flames and the distant pop of rifles echoed across the fields. Alexei lowered his head for a moment, feeling the weight of everything. The noise, the decisions, the lives saved, the lives lost. His hands trembled slightly, though he hid it from the crew. Pavel was breathing hard, staring forward as if unsure the world around them was real. Yuri leaned against the shells, sweat dripping from his face. Sergei wiped ash from his brow and exhaled a breath he must have been holding for minutes. Alexei finally spoke. "We hold here until the regiment arrives." It wasn't an order of bravado, just a quiet statement of necessity. But when the infantry arrived hours later and saw the smoking German wrecks scattered across the village and river road, they stared at Alexei's tank with disbelief. Stories spread instantly, some exaggerated. Some didn't need to. Rumors flew faster than reports. A lone Soviet tank had stopped a German armored thrust. One commander had destroyed 18 tanks. One crew had broken a spearhead that was supposed to crush the entire flank. Some said he was invincible. Some said he had survived more direct hits than any man should. Some even said he walked through fire, though that was just myth shaped by awe. The Germans heard the stories too. Their captured soldiers spoke of him with mixture of dread and respect. They called him the ghost tank, or the unkillable commander. They didn't know his name, but they knew his impact. Alexei never celebrated the title. To him it meant he had lived another day, while too many others had not. He knew luck had been involved. Luck, skill, and a crew that fought like brothers. The battle became a turning point in that sector of the front, allowing the Soviets to regroup and hold the river long enough for reinforcements to arrive. But Alexei didn't think about strategy or recognition. His mind returned to his radio operator, lost the day before, to the villages burned, to the civilians who fled into the forests, to the families who would never know the names of the soldiers who died so they could escape. War didn't give room for glory, only survival, but legends form whether you want them or not. Weeks later, when the regiment received new tanks, many crews requested to serve under Alexei's command. They trusted him not because he destroyed 18 tanks, but because he never wasted their lives. Officers began consulting him on tactics, asking how he predicted German maneuvers so precisely. His answers were always the same: watch the terrain, know your enemy, never assume your tank is invincible, and never abandon your crew. Yet something inside him had changed. The battle at Vasakovo etched itself into him the way shrapnel scars the skin. He felt the weight of the 18 tanks he destroyed, the crews inside them, the decisions that led to each moment. He wondered sometimes if those German commanders were men like him, cold, tired, often scared, simply following orders. It didn't make their mission any less deadly, but it made the world more complicated. Still, when new offensives began, he climbed into his tank without hesitation. His crew followed, trusting his judgment more than any medal or speech. They moved together like a living organism, Sergei's steady aim, Pavel's instinctive driving, Yuri's relentless loading, Alexei's calm command. They became known as one of the most efficient tank units in the sector. In the months that followed, Alexei would fight in many more battles, but none carved his legend the way Vasakovo did. To many soldiers, that day became a symbol of resilience. Proof that even when the situation seemed hopeless, One determined commander and one determined crew could shift the tide. Years later, long after the war ended, veterans still spoke of him. They described the silhouette of a lone T-34 rolling out of smoke to face a line of German tanks. They talked about the flash of his gun, the impossible angles he fought from, the unshakable discipline of his crew. Some of the stories were embellished, some weren't. History blends truth and memory until the line between them becomes thin. Alexei himself rarely discussed it. When asked, he said only that he did what anyone would have done in his place. He refused to claim he was unkillable. He remembered too well the moments when a single shell, landing a few centimeters differently, could have ended everything. He remembered the men he lost, the ones he couldn't save, but he couldn't stop others from telling the story. It grew over time, spreading beyond his regiment, beyond the front, beyond the war. It became part of military lore. Young tank crews studied the tactics he used, how he used urban cover, how he disrupted German formations, how he turned the enemy's discipline into a weakness. Some even wrote letters asking for his advice. He responded to only a few. The ones he answered gave the advice he believed mattered most. Fight smart, not brave. Trust your crew, but prepare for the worst. And remember that war only ends when someone chooses to stop fighting. In the end, Alexei's legacy was not the 18 tanks he destroyed, but the lives he helped protect by standing firm when everything around him seemed to crumble. He didn't seek recognition, but he couldn't escape it. The legend built itself from the ashes of Vyssokovo. German tank commanders who survived that sector never forgot that day. Years after the war, when interviewed, some recalled seeing a Soviet tank appear from the smoke with such precision and ferocity that they thought they were fighting an entire battalion. They spoke of the uncanny accuracy of its gunner, the unpredictable maneuvers of its driver, the relentlessness of its attacks. They described it as if it were a force of nature rather than a machine. To them, the man behind it remained a mystery. They never learned his name, but they remembered the fear, the respect, the sudden understanding that one skilled crew could be more lethal than numbers suggested. Alexei survived the war. He returned to a small village far from the front lines. He rarely spoke of combat, preferring to work quietly repairing farm machinery. Children in the village saw him as a gentle man who could fix anything, from a broken pump to a cracked wagon axle. They didn't know he once commanded a tank that stopped an armored column. Adults who did know never pushed the subject. They sensed he carried memories that did not belong in conversation. But every year, on a quiet morning, he visited the graves of fallen comrades. He left flowers. He stood in silence. The war receded further into the past, but he never let it disappear. Memory was his way of honoring those who didn't return. In time, the world changed. New wars emerged, new technologies, new strategies. Tank designs evolved, doctrines shifted, and military academies wrote new textbooks. Yet the story of the commander who destroyed 18 tanks remained in circulation, told wherever soldiers gathered to discuss courage under fire. Some called it a lesson in tactics. Others called it a reminder that victory can hinge on a single crew's decisions. Many simply called it unbelievable, but the people who served with him knew it was real. Alexei did not consider himself a hero. Heroes, in his view, were often young men who didn't get the chance to grow old, but he accepted that he had been a part of something larger than himself, a moment of defiance that rippled outward through history. When he died, surrounded by family, former comrades traveled long distances to attend the funeral. Men who had not worn uniforms in decades stood in silence as the wind moved through the trees. Some brought old medals, some brought faded photographs, and some brought nothing but memories. They spoke quietly among themselves. Do you remember Vyssokovo? Do you remember the day he stopped them? Do you remember how we thought we were finished? They remembered everything. A historian once said that wars are won by logistics, strategy, and industry, but also by individuals who, at crucial moments, refuse to yield. Alexei Morozov was one of those individuals. The Germans could not stop him that day. They tried with steel, fire, and discipline, but he stood between them and the river, between them and an entire collapsing flank, between them and countless lives. In the end, he wasn't unkillable. He was simply unbroken. And sometimes, that is enough to change the course of a battle